Some secrets are buried so deep that only nature herself can reveal them. The lightning came down like God's own chisel that August night in Blackwood County, Montana, splitting the ancient granite stone that had watched over the Hendricks farm for 3 generations. Sarah Chen had driven 12 hours through the storm to study what locals called the Devil's Anvil, a massive monolith that geological surveys couldn't explain. She was a woman who solved puzzles for a living, a geologist whose reputation was built on finding answers where others found only mysteries. But when morning came and she approached the split stone, what she found inside defied every law of science she knew. Dozens of amber pods, each the size of a football, lined the chamber walls like some impossible nursery, and floating inside each one was something that looked human but wasn't quite right. The real shock came when she realized the pregnant women from the surrounding farms had been gathering at the site since dawn, their eyes glazed with an otherworldly calm, their hands pressed protectively over their bellies. They spoke of dreams, of being called home, of children who would be different. What had been sleeping in that stone for centuries? And why were the unborn children of Blackwood County changing to match whatever was inside those pods? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at the edge of the crowd, her field notebook clutched against her chest like a shield. The morning mist clung to the pasture, and through it she counted 17 women, all visibly pregnant, all staring at the split monolith with the same unsettling serenity. "Ma'am?" A voice behind her made her jump. She turned to find a man in his 60s, weathered hands gripping a coffee mug. "You're the rock lady, ain't you? Tom Hendricks. This is my land." Sarah nodded, extending her hand. "Dr. Chen, thank you for calling the university, though I have to admit, your description didn't quite prepare me for—" She gestured toward the gathering. Tom's eyes followed hers to the women, started showing up around sunrise. "My wife Martha's among them. She's 6 months along with our first grandchild." His voice cracked slightly. "Been trying to get her to come back to the house, but she won't budge. None of them will." Sarah pulled out her digital camera and began documenting the scene. Through the lens, the tableau looked even more surreal. Pregnant women arranged in a loose semicircle around the ancient stone, their faces tilted upward as if listening to something only they could hear. "Mr. Hendricks, has anything like this happened before? Any unusual behavior around the stone?" "That's just it. Nothing ever happened around the stone. It's been here since before my grandfather's time, probably longer. Family always figured it was just some glacier deposit. Kids used to dare each other to touch it on Halloween." He paused, studying her face. "You really think there's something scientific going on here?" Sarah lowered her camera. 20 years of fieldwork had taught her to trust her instincts, and every instinct she had was screaming that this was bigger than unusual mineral formations. The pods she'd glimpsed inside the split stone weren't natural. The way the chamber walls seemed to pulse with their own faint luminescence. The perfect preservation of whatever was floating inside those amber-like spheres. "I'd like to get closer," she said. "Take some preliminary measurements before I call in a full research team." Tom shifted uncomfortably. "Well, you're welcome to try, but—" Sarah was already walking toward the monolith, her equipment bag slung over her shoulder. The women didn't acknowledge her approach, didn't even seem to notice her. Up close, she could see their lips moving in silent unison, as if reciting some shared prayer or mantra. The split in the granite was clean, surgical almost, nothing like the jagged fractures lightning typically produced. Sarah ran her fingers along the edge, noting the smoothness, the way the stone seemed to have parted rather than broken. Her geological hammer felt insignificant in her hands as she chipped away a small sample for later analysis. Then she peered into the chamber. The pods were larger than she'd initially thought, and there were more of them. She counted at least 40 embedded in the walls like organic gems. Each one glowed with a soft amber light that didn't seem to have an external source. And inside, Sarah's breath caught. The figures floating in the viscous fluid were unmistakably humanoid. Tiny heads, delicate limbs, the curved spines of developing fetuses. But their skulls were elongated, their eye sockets too large. Thin membranes stretched between their fingers like webbing, and along their spines she could see what looked like gill slits. She forced herself to think like a scientist. Document first, theorize later. She began photographing everything, adjusting her camera settings to capture the strange luminescence. The pods seemed to pulse in rhythm like a collective heartbeat. Beautiful, isn't it? Sarah spun around. One of the pregnant women had approached, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and kind eyes that held an unnatural calm. "I'm sorry." "The nursery," the woman said, placing a protective hand over her belly. "We've been waiting so long for it to open, for them to show us the way forward. I don't understand." "What nursery? Who's been waiting?" The woman smiled but didn't answer. Instead, she placed her palm against the stone, and Sarah could swear she saw the pods pulse brighter in response. "You study rocks, don't you?" the woman continued. "Then you know how patient stone can be, how it holds secrets for millions of years, waiting for the right moment to reveal them. We've been patient too. Our mothers were patient, their mothers before them." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "How long has your family lived here?" "Since the beginning, since the stone chose this place." The woman's eyes never left the chamber. "My daughter will be born different, special, just like the others will be, just like they're meant to be." Sarah backed away, her scientific mind racing. Mass hysteria? Shared delusion? But the pods were real. The anatomical anomalies were real. And something deep in her bones told her that whatever was happening here had been planned long before last night's storm. Her phone buzzed with a text from the university. "How's the rock formation? Anything worth a follow-up study?" Sarah stared at the screen, then at the women, then at the impossible nursery carved into ancient stone. Everything worth studying, and everything worth fearing. Sarah's fingers trembled as she typed her response to Dr. Marcus Webb, her department head and mentor of 15 years. "Preliminary findings suggest significant geological anomaly. We'll need 48 to 72 hours for proper documentation before making recommendations." The lie came easier than she'd expected. In her real life, her normal life, Sarah Chen didn't lie. She was the one colleagues came to for brutal honesty about their research proposals, the one who'd rather lose funding than compromise data integrity, the one who'd ended her engagement to David precisely because she couldn't pretend their relationship was working when all evidence pointed to fundamental incompatibility. But standing in this Montana pasture, watching pregnant women commune with an impossible stone nursery, honesty felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. At least not yet. Her phone rang. "Marcus." "Sarah, how's the wild goose chase treating you? Please tell me you're not stuck in some tourist trap rock shop buying geodes." Despite everything, she smiled. Marcus had a gift for making her laugh, even when she was elbow-deep in her most obsessive research phases. No geodes, though the formation is more complex than expected. Define complex. Are we talking publication-worthy complex or just interesting enough to justify the travel budget complex? Sarah watched the woman with graying hair press both palms against the split stone now, her lips moving in that same silent rhythm as the others. Potentially publication-worthy. I need more time to rule out contamination and external factors. That's my girl. Take the time you need. Oh, and Elena stopped by looking for you. Something about dinner plans? Elena. Sarah's chest tightened with guilt. Her best friend since graduate school, the one person who actually managed to drag her away from her lab for normal human activities. They'd planned to try that new Ethiopian restaurant when Sarah got back from Montana. "Tell her I'll call her tonight," Sarah said. "And Marcus, don't mention this to anyone else in the department yet. I want to be sure of my preliminary findings first. Your secret's safe. You know me. I'd rather under-promise and over-deliver anyway." After hanging up, Sarah found herself thinking about her life back in Chicago, her apartment with its carefully organized bookshelves and the reading chair by the window where she'd spend Sunday mornings with coffee and the latest geological journals. Her lab at the university, where every instrument had its place and every sample was catalogued with obsessive precision. The faculty mixers where she'd nurse a single glass of wine and discuss research with colleagues who understood why she could spend 6 hours analyzing crystal formations without getting bored. It was a good life, a logical life, a life where the most mysterious thing she encountered was an unusual sediment layer or an unexpected mineral composition. But if she was honest, and Sarah always tried to be honest with herself, it was also a life that sometimes felt like watching the world through laboratory glass. Safe, controlled, predictable. Even her relationship with David had followed that pattern. 5 years of careful, rational courtship that checked all the right boxes but never made her heart race or kept her awake at night burning with curiosity. She'd built a career on answering questions, but when was the last time she'd encountered a question that truly consumed her? When had she last felt the electric thrill of standing at the edge of something genuinely unknown? Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "How's Montana? Meet any cowboys yet?" Sarah started to type back something flippant, then stopped. How could she explain that she'd found something that might rewrite everything they thought they knew about human development? Something that suggested the line between natural evolution and deliberate intervention might be far blurrier than anyone imagined. "Still investigating. We'll call you soon with details." Another text appeared immediately. "That's very un-Sarah-like vague of you. You okay?" Elena knew her too well. Sarah's friends often joked that she was incapable of small talk. Ask her about her day and you'd get a 15-minute discourse on whatever geological problem was occupying her mind. The fact that she was being evasive would set off alarm bells. "Just want to be thorough. You know how I get. I do know how you get, which is why I'm worried. Don't disappear into obsession land, okay? Some of us need you to stay human." Sarah looked around at the women still maintaining their vigil, at Tom Hendricks, pacing near his farmhouse with increasing agitation, at the split stone that pulsed with impossible life. The irony of Elena's words wasn't lost on her. Stay human. But what if humanity itself wasn't what they'd always believed it to be? Her stomach growled, reminding her that she'd been here for hours without eating. In her normal life, Elena would have already texted 3 times asking if she'd remembered lunch. Marcus would have dragged her away from her microscope for the faculty meeting she'd inevitably forgotten. A structured, predictable routine kept her grounded, kept her connected to the world beyond her research. But as she watched the pregnant woman trace patterns on the stone's surface, patterns that seemed to make the pod's pulse brighter, Sarah realized she was willing to risk all of that comfortable predictability for whatever truth lay buried in this ancient nursery. The question was, what else would she lose in the process? Sarah was still contemplating Elena's warning when the screaming started. It came from the direction of the farmhouse, high, piercing, and distinctly female. The pregnant women around the stone didn't even flinch, but Sarah's head snapped toward the sound. Tom Hendricks was already running, his coffee mug abandoned in the grass. Sarah followed, her equipment bag bouncing against her hip. Through the farmhouse's kitchen window, she could see a young woman, barely out of her teens, doubled over at the table, clutching her swollen belly. Tom burst through the door with Sarah close behind. "Amy, what's wrong?" Tom's voice cracked with panic. "Where's Dr. Morrison?" The girl looked up, tears streaming down her face. "He won't come," she gasped between contractions. "Says I'm not due for another month. Says it's just false labor." Her eyes found Sarah. "But they're calling to me. The baby's in the stone. They're calling and my baby's answering and I can feel it changing." "Changing how?" Sarah knelt beside the girl's chair, her scientific mind overriding her discomfort. "Amy, can you describe what you're feeling?" "Like something's rewiring itself inside me. Like my baby's remembering how to be something else." Amy's grip on Sarah's arm was desperate. "You're a scientist. You have to help me understand what's happening. Tom paced behind them, cell phone pressed to his ear. Dr. Morrison, this is Tom Hendricks again. Amy's in real distress here. No, I don't think she's being hysterical. What do you mean, mass psychosis? Sarah's blood chilled. Mr. Hendricks, has Dr. Morrison seen the other women? Does he know about the stone? Tom's face went pale. Says he's had 7 pregnant women call him since sunrise, all reporting the same symptoms. Premature contractions, vivid dreams, talk about their babies evolving. He thinks they're feeding off each other's anxiety. Amy's fingernails dug into Sarah's wrist. It's not anxiety. Look. She guided Sarah's hand to her belly. Through the fabric of her dress, Sarah felt movement, but not the normal kicks and rolls of a developing fetus. This felt coordinated, purposeful, as if something inside was practicing specific motions. When are you due? Sarah asked quietly. 6 weeks, but it's ready now. They're all ready now. Amy's eyes were glassy with pain and something that looked disturbingly like wonder. My grandmother told me stories about the stone. Said there were times when it called to the women of the valley, but never like this. Never so many at once. Sarah's phone buzzed with an emergency alert, severe weather warning. Second storm system approaching Blackwood County. Seek shelter immediately. Through the kitchen window, she could see dark clouds massing on the horizon, moving with unnatural speed. The pregnant women around the stone remained motionless, seemingly oblivious to the approaching storm. We need to get everyone inside, Sarah said, but Amy shook her head violently. No, we have to stay close to them, to the pods. If we leave now... Her breathing became rapid, panicked. Something terrible will happen. I can feel it. They need us to be here when the second lightning comes. The second lightning? Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. Amy, what do you know about the second lightning? It completes the circuit, opens the final seal. Amy struggled to her feet, one hand braced against her lower back. My baby's been dreaming about it. About coming home to the nursery. About joining the others. Tom had stopped pacing, his phone forgotten in his hand. Others? What others? But Amy was already walking toward the door, moving with surprising steadiness despite her obvious labor pains. I have to be there. We all have to be there. It's time. Sarah faced a choice that felt like standing at the edge of a precipice. Every instinct she'd developed over 20 years of careful, methodical research screamed at her to document everything, call in proper authorities, follow protocol, contact the CDC about possible contamination, alert her department about potential extraterrestrial artifacts. Approach this systematically, safely. But Amy was walking into a storm that Sarah increasingly suspected was no natural weather pattern. The pregnant women outside weren't exhibiting mass hysteria. They were responding to something real, something that had been waiting in that stone for longer than anyone imagined. And if she retreated into academic caution now, she might lose the only chance to understand what was happening before it was too late to stop it. Her phone buzzed with another text from Elena, seriously worried now. Call me, please. Sarah looked at the message, then at Amy's determined figure heading toward the stone, then at the unnatural storm bearing down on them. She thought about her safe, predictable life in Chicago, her carefully controlled research, her reputation for methodical precision. Then she turned off her phone, shouldered her equipment bag, and followed Amy into the storm. Some questions, she realized, were worth risking everything to answer. The wind hit them like a physical wall the moment they stepped outside. Sarah's equipment bag felt impossibly heavy as she struggled to keep pace with Amy, who moved toward the stone with the determined focus of someone answering an ancient summons. The approaching storm had transformed the sky into a bruised canvas of purples and blacks, shot through with veins of unnatural green lightning that made Sarah's skin crawl. What am I doing? The question hammered in her mind with each labored step. This wasn't research anymore. This was madness. She was a geologist, for God's sake. She studied rock formations and mineral compositions, not whatever this was, whatever these women believed they were part of. But as another contraction seized Amy, and the girl's face contorted in pain that seemed equal parts agony and anticipation, Sarah couldn't shake the memory of those pods pulsing in perfect synchronization, the impossible anatomical features she'd glimpsed, the way the stone had split with surgical precision despite being struck by lightning. 20 years of careful research, she reminded herself. 20 years of building credibility, of peer-reviewed publications, of methodical scientific inquiry. And here she was, chasing a teenager into a supernatural storm based on nothing more than intuition, and a growing certainty that everything she thought she knew about the natural world was wrong. Her phone, though silenced, continued to buzz against her hip with what she imagined were increasingly frantic messages from Elena. Elena, who worried when Sarah skipped lunch while absorbed in research, who would be horrified to know that Sarah had deliberately walked into what could only be described as an extraterrestrial event without backup, without protocol, without so much as informing her department of the true nature of what she'd found. You could still turn back, a rational voice in her mind insisted. Document what you've seen so far. Return to Chicago. Assemble a proper research team with appropriate equipment and safety protocols. Study this thing the right way. But even as she considered retreat, Sarah knew it was already too late for that. The pods weren't going to wait for academic committees to approve funding. The storm overhead wasn't following normal meteorological patterns. She could see it rotating around the stone like a massive hurricane condensed into a few square miles. And the women gathering around the monolith weren't going to postpone their labor until peer review was complete. Amy stumbled, and Sarah caught her elbow without thinking. The girl's skin was burning hot, and when she looked at Sarah, her pupils were dilated to pinpricks. "You feel it too, don't you?" Amy gasped. "The pull, the calling. It's not just for us, for the mothers. It's for anyone who can see what's really happening." Sarah wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. There was something drawing her forward, something that made the hair on her arms stand on end and filled her mouth with the taste of copper and ozone. Every step toward the stone felt like walking deeper into a magnetic field that operated on frequencies she didn't understand. This is how careers end, she thought desperately. This is how rational people disappear into conspiracy theories and fringe science. One step at a time, one rationalization after another, until you're so far from solid ground that you can't find your way back. She thought about David, her ex-fiancé, who had accused her of loving puzzles more than people. "You can't solve everything, Sarah," he'd said during their final fight. "Sometimes you have to accept that some questions don't have answers, or that the answers aren't worth destroying everything else in your life." She'd dismissed his concerns as jealousy of her dedication to her work. But standing here, feeling her careful scientific worldview cracking apart like the split stone, she wondered if David had seen something in her that she'd refused to acknowledge, a dangerous willingness to sacrifice stability for the sake of understanding. The other pregnant women had formed a loose circle around the monolith, their hands pressed against the stone, their faces turned upward to the writhing storm clouds. Sarah could see now that they weren't all from the same family, weren't all the same age. Some looked barely out of their teens, others were middle-aged, but they all wore the same expression of painful anticipation, as if they were waiting for something that was both wonderful and terrible. Lightning flickered overhead. Not the random strikes of a normal storm, but precise, organized pulses that seemed to be building toward something. With each flash, the pods inside the stone glowed brighter, and the women's breathing synchronized further. Sarah's rational mind catalogued everything: the electromagnetic anomalies, the synchronized biological responses, the impossible preservation of the specimens in the stone. But beneath her scientific observations ran a current of pure terror. She was witnessing something that challenged not just her understanding of geology or biology, but her fundamental assumptions about humanity's place in the universe. And she was walking deeper into it by choice, driven by the same obsessive need to understand that had defined her entire adult life. The same need that had cost her David, that worried Elena, that kept her isolated in her lab while the world moved on around her. Amy squeezed her hand tighter as another contraction hit, and Sarah realized with crystalline clarity that there was no turning back now. The lightning struck at the exact moment Amy's water broke. Sarah felt the electrical charge pass through her body like a living thing, raising every hair on her arms and filling her sinuses with the acrid smell of ozone. Around them, the circle of pregnant women cried out in unison, not in pain, but in what sounded disturbingly like recognition. The stone pulsed with brilliant amber light, and Sarah could see the pods inside responding, their surfaces rippling as if something within was preparing to emerge. "It's starting," Amy whispered, her grip on Sarah's hand becoming painful. The awakening. They're remembering how to be born. Sarah's scientific mind screamed warnings. Electromagnetic exposure, unknown biological agents, potential radiation hazards. Every protocol she'd ever learned demanded immediate evacuation, proper equipment, hazmat procedures, but her feet remained planted in the muddy ground as another synchronized pulse of light rippled through the stone. She watched one of the pods, larger than the others, positioned near the center of the chamber, begin to crack along hairline fractures that formed geometric patterns too precise to be natural. Through her camera's telephoto lens, she could see movement inside, something pressing against the amber-like shell with deliberate, coordinated motions. "Dr. Chen!" Tom Hendricks was shouting from somewhere behind her, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "The emergency services can't get through. The storm's knocked out the main road." No emergency services, no evacuation route, no backup plan. Sarah was committed now, whether she'd chosen to be or not. The realization should have terrified her, and part of her was terrified, the careful academic part that had spent 2 decades avoiding anything that couldn't be peer-reviewed and published in respectable journals. But a larger part of her felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood, the electric thrill of standing at the absolute edge of human knowledge. This was what the early explorers must have felt stepping onto unmapped continents, what the first astronomers experienced peering through their primitive telescopes at impossible new worlds. Amy doubled over with another contraction, and Sarah found herself automatically supporting the girl's weight, counting the seconds between waves of pain. Seconds apart now, active labor. Where that knowledge came from, she had no idea. Her expertise was in rock formations, not obstetrics. But somehow she knew with certainty that Amy's baby was coming, whether or not there was medical assistance available. "How many others are in labor?" Sarah called to the nearest woman in the circle, a middle-aged blonde whose face was slick with rain and sweat. "All of us," came the reply. "We all went into labor when the first lightning hit, but we're waiting for the second strike, the one that opens the nursery completely." The nursery. That's what Amy had called it too. Not a chamber, not a geological formation, but a nursery, as if the stone had been designed specifically for this moment, this convergence of human mothers and whatever was gestating in those impossible pods. Sarah's hands moved without conscious direction, setting up her portable seismometer and electromagnetic field detector with practiced efficiency. If she was going to witness humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial life, she was damn well going to document it properly. The scientist in her demanded that much, even as everything else she'd believed about rational inquiry crumbled around her. Another pod began to crack, this one closer to the stone's surface. The fracture patterns were identical to the first, too identical to be coincidental. Sarah's camera captured each moment in high resolution, the precise geometric splits, the synchronized pulsing of the internal light, the way the amber-like substance seemed to dissolve rather than shatter. "Sarah." Amy's voice was different now, deeper somehow, as if something else was speaking through her. "You understand, don't you? This isn't an invasion, it's a homecoming." Sarah looked into the girl's eyes and saw something that made her stomach clench with primitive fear. Amy's pupils had dilated to perfect circles, and behind them was an intelligence that felt ancient and patient and utterly alien. This wasn't the scared teenager who had begged for help in the farmhouse kitchen. This was something else, something that had been waiting decades, maybe centuries, for this moment. Run, every instinct screamed. Run, now while you still can. Instead, Sarah tightened her grip on Amy's hand and turned her camera toward the next pod as it began its precise, impossible hatching sequence. She thought fleetingly of Elena's worried texts, of Marcus waiting for her report, of the safe, predictable life she was leaving behind with each passing second. But there was no going back now. The threshold had been crossed the moment she'd followed Amy into the storm. Whatever was about to emerge from those pods, whatever truth about humanity's origins was hidden in this ancient nursery, she was going to witness it, even if the knowledge destroyed everything she thought she knew about being human. The second lightning strike was building overhead, and Sarah prepared to document the impossible. The second lightning strike never came. Instead, as Sarah held her breath and gripped her camera, the storm simply stopped. The wind died to nothing, the rain ceased mid-drop, and the writhing clouds overhead froze in place like a photograph. The silence was so complete that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. "What the hell?" she began, but Amy's hand clamped over her mouth. "Listen," the girl whispered, and there was fear in her voice now, the first genuine human emotion Sarah had heard from her since they'd entered the circle. "Something's wrong. This isn't how it's supposed to happen." In the unnatural stillness, Sarah became aware of a low humming sound emanating from somewhere beneath the ground. Her seismometer was registering vibrations, but the pattern was all wrong, too regular, too purposeful. It sounded almost like machinery. The pregnant women around the stone had gone rigid, their faces turned upward with expressions of confusion and growing alarm. Whatever intelligence they'd been responding to, whatever ancient summons had drawn them here, seemed to have been interrupted. "Dr. Chen!" Tom Hendricks came running across the frozen farmyard, his boots splashing through puddles that should have been rippling with raindrops, but instead lay mirror still. "You need to see this. There are vehicles coming up the access road. Military vehicles." Sarah's blood went cold. She'd been so focused on the immediate mystery of the stone and the pods that she hadn't considered the broader implications. Of course, someone else would have noticed the electromagnetic anomalies. Of course, satellite monitoring would have picked up the storm's impossible behavior. And of course, the response wouldn't be academic researchers with proper protocols. It would be people with guns and containment units and very different priorities. "How long do we have?" she asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be nearly enough. "Maybe 10 minutes. They're moving fast, but the road's still muddy from the storm." Sarah looked back at the stone. 3 pods had cracked open partially, their surfaces forming those precise geometric patterns, but whatever emergence had begun was now stalled. The creatures inside, and she could no longer pretend they were anything else, seemed to be waiting for some signal that wasn't coming. "This is my moment," she realized. "Whatever's in those pods, whatever this nursery really is, I'm the only scientist here. I'm the only one who might understand what we're really looking at before it gets locked away in some government facility." "Amy," she said urgently, "what do you know about the military, about government interest in the stone?" But Amy was backing away from the monolith, her face pale with panic. "This is wrong. The awakening should have completed by now. The second lightning should have—" She gasped as another contraction hit her, this one clearly causing genuine pain rather than the strange euphoria she'd shown before. "Something's blocking it. Something's interfering." The humming beneath their feet grew louder, and Sarah's instruments began registering massive electromagnetic interference. Whatever was happening underground was disrupting the entire process. That's when she saw him. A figure emerged from behind the farmhouse, tall, middle-aged, wearing civilian clothes, but moving with military precision. He raised a device that looked like a cross between a tablet and a radar gun, pointed it at the stone, and the humming intensified dramatically. "Dr. Morrison?" Tom called out in recognition. "Thank God you made it through the storm." But Sarah was already moving, her scientific instinct screaming danger. She'd seen enough government cover-ups in her career to recognize a containment operation when it was happening. The frozen storm, the disrupted electromagnetic patterns, the convenient arrival of Dr. Morrison with advanced equipment, none of it was coincidental. "That's not Dr. Morrison," she shouted to Tom. But the man with the device was already speaking into a headset, coordinating with the approaching vehicles. Amy collapsed to her knees, clutching her belly as her labor intensified. Around the stone, the other pregnant women were experiencing the same crisis, their synchronized birthing process interrupted at the worst possible moment, leaving them caught between human and something else entirely. Sarah made a choice that would have horrified her careful, academic self from just hours before. She grabbed her portable equipment and ran toward the stone, dodging between the laboring women to get close enough to take readings from the partially opened pods. "Dr. Chen, step away from the artifact." The false Dr. Morrison's voice carried military authority, but Sarah ignored him. She had maybe 5 minutes before the vehicles arrived, maybe less before whatever jamming device he was using completely shut down the nursery's activation sequence. Her camera captured close-up images of the nearest pod's contents, a humanoid form about the size of a newborn, but with elongated limbs and what appeared to be gill slits along its elongated neck. Its skin had an opalescent quality that reminded her of abalone shell, and its oversized eyes were closed but moving rapidly beneath translucent lids. REM sleep, she thought, with scientific detachment, even as her hands shook. It's dreaming. The question was, dreaming about what? The creature's eyes snapped open. Sarah stumbled backward, her camera nearly slipping from trembling hands, as she found herself staring into pupils that weren't black, but a shifting kaleidoscope of silver and gold. The being's gaze locked onto hers with an intelligence that was unmistakably aware, unmistakably ancient, and Sarah felt her scientific rationality fracture completely. It was trying to communicate. Images flooded her mind, not words, but concepts that bypassed language entirely. She saw Earth as it had been millennia ago, saw the first primitive humans huddled around fires while something watched from the shadows, saw generation after generation of careful selection, guided evolution, deliberate enhancement of the species. The stone wasn't just a nursery, it was a laboratory, and humanity itself was the experiment. "Dr. Chen!" The false Morrison was closing distance fast, his jamming device whining at frequencies that made her teeth ache. "You're contaminating the specimen." But Sarah couldn't look away from those impossible eyes. More images cascaded through her consciousness, star charts showing paths between distant worlds, biological schematics of human genetic modification spanning thousands of years, and underneath it all, a sense of profound sadness. These beings weren't invaders, they were refugees, and Earth was supposed to have been their ark. Amy's scream shattered the psychic connection. The girl was hemorrhaging now, her body unable to complete a birthing process that required electromagnetic frequencies the military device was deliberately suppressing. Around the stone, the other women were collapsing one by one, their synchronized labor turning into medical crisis. Sarah's scientific mind warred with something deeper, a protective instinct she'd never experienced before. These women trusted her. Amy had brought her here because somehow she'd known Sarah would understand, and now that understanding was becoming a choice: preserve her academic objectivity or act on knowledge that would brand her a conspiracy theorist forever. "Tom," she shouted, "get them away from the stone. The electromagnetic interference is killing them." But Tom was backing toward the farmhouse, his face grey with shock as more military vehicles materialized through the unnatural stillness. Not arriving, materializing, as if they'd been cloaked somehow. This wasn't a rapid response to an anomaly, this was an operation that had been planned well in advance. They've been watching this place, Sarah realized with sickening clarity. Watching and waiting for the activation sequence. They know exactly what this is. The false Morrison raised his device again, and the humming beneath the ground intensified. Inside the stone, The partially emerged creatures began convulsing, their silver-gold eyes rolling back as their life signs, registered on Sarah's now screaming instruments, started to fail. Sarah made the second choice that would define the rest of her life. She sprinted toward Morrison's position, raising her field detector like a weapon. She had no plan beyond disrupting his signal, no strategy beyond buying time for the women and whatever was trying to be born. Morrison saw her coming and spoke rapidly into his headset. "Target is compromised. Recommend immediate containment protocol 7. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She wasn't a scientist anymore. She was a target. Her documentation of the site, her interaction with the specimens, her very presence here had moved her from observer to security risk. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't be allowed to leave with her memories intact. She thought of Elena's texts going unanswered, of her carefully ordered life in Chicago that now seemed impossibly distant. She thought of Marcus expecting her geological report and instead getting news that one of his researchers had vanished investigating an atmospheric anomaly in rural Montana. Most of all, she thought of the being in the pod whose ancient eyes had shown her humanity's true history, a history someone was willing to kill to keep hidden. The military vehicles were close enough now that she could see armed figures deploying with practiced efficiency. They moved like a containment team that had done this before, in other places, with other discoveries. How many sites like this existed? How many researchers had gotten too close and simply disappeared? Amy grabbed Sarah's ankle as she ran past, her grip surprisingly strong for someone losing blood. "The second stone," she gasped. "There's a second nursery site, the backup location. They don't know about—" A tranquilizer dart sprouted from Amy's neck, cutting off her words. The girl collapsed unconscious, but not before pressing something into Sarah's hand. A small metallic object that felt warm against her palm and seemed to pulse with its own inner rhythm. Sarah closed her fist around the object and kept running toward Morrison, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her, the partially emerged beings in the stone were dying. Ahead of her, armed figures were establishing a perimeter that would trap her at the site of humanity's greatest discovery and most carefully guarded secret. She had perhaps 30 seconds before everything she'd witnessed, everything she'd learned, would be classified beyond recovery. 30 seconds to decide who she really was. The warm, pulsing object in Sarah's fist seemed to burn against her palm as she made her decision. Not the careful, measured choice of Dr. Sarah Chen, respected geologist with a spotless academic record, but the desperate gamble of someone who had seen too much to pretend ignorance was still an option. She veered away from Morrison at the last second, using her momentum to launch herself toward the stone instead. Her field detector clattered to the ground as she pressed both hands against the ancient surface, the metallic object Amy had given her making contact with the monolith. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. The stone responded. Not just the electromagnetic readings that had been her bread and butter for 2 decades, but something that felt alive, aware, and desperately grateful for her touch. Through her palms, she could feel the nursery's systems fighting against Morrison's jamming signal, trying to complete a process that had been millennia in the making. "Get away from there." Morrison's voice cracked with something that might have been panic. "You don't understand what you're interfacing with." But Sarah did understand, with a clarity that made her previous scientific certainties seem like children's games. The object in her hand, warm, pulsing, definitely not of Earth, was a key, not just to the stone's systems, but to knowledge that stretched back to humanity's origins. Amy hadn't randomly grabbed some alien artifact. She'd been carrying it, waiting for someone who could use it properly. Waiting for someone willing to choose truth over safety. Sarah pressed harder against the stone, feeling the key's rhythm synchronize with her heartbeat. Around her, the dying creatures in their amber pods began to stabilize. The women scattered across the farmyard stopped hemorrhaging as their bodies found their natural birthing rhythm again, no longer fighting against suppressed electromagnetic frequencies. "Containment breach!" Morrison was shouting into his headset now, his professional calm completely abandoned. Target has activated the interface. Repeat, we have full activation. The humming beneath the ground changed pitch, becoming almost musical. Sarah's instruments, still scattered around the stone, registered massive energy fluctuations as systems that had lain dormant for centuries came fully online. This wasn't just a nursery awakening. It was a beacon, announcing to something vast and distant that Earth's hybrid generation was finally ready to emerge. Through the key, Sarah felt the stone's awareness expand beyond the farm, reaching out to touch the minds of every pregnant woman within 50 miles. But now she understood what she was sensing. These weren't random human mothers being influenced by alien forces. These were descendants of previous generations, carrying genetic modifications that had been carefully cultivated for exactly this moment. Arnie wasn't the first. This has been happening for generations. 20 seconds to containment protocol, someone shouted from the approaching perimeter. Sarah could hear the distinctive whine of energy weapons powering up, see the red dots of laser sights beginning to dance across the stone's surface. She had a choice that would define not just her life, but potentially the future of human evolution itself. She could release the key, step away, let Morrison's jamming resume, and allow the military to contain this site like they'd obviously contained others. She could return to her safe academic world, probably with her memories selectively edited, and continue studying normal rocks that didn't rewrite the history of human civilization. Or she could hold on and accept the consequences. The first creature began to emerge fully from its pod, its opalescent skin catching the strange light emanating from the stone's interior. It was beautiful and terrible, and absolutely nothing like the textbook evolution she'd spent her career studying. This was proof that humanity's development had been guided, enhanced, directed toward this moment of hybridization. Sarah thought of every comfortable assumption she'd held about scientific objectivity, about the importance of peer review and academic consensus. Then she thought of Amy bleeding in the dirt, of the other women being used as unwilling incubators for a program they didn't understand, of how many other sites like this might exist around the world. The key pulsed harder against her palm, and she realized it wasn't just a tool, it was a choice. Hold on, and become part of something larger than human science. Let go and watch as another piece of humanity's true history disappeared into classified files. Dr. Chen! Morrison had his weapon drawn now, not a tranquilizer, but something that hummed with the same frequencies as his jamming device. Step away from the interface, or I will use lethal force. Sarah looked into the silver-gold eyes of the emerging being and saw recognition there, not just awareness, but gratitude. Whatever these creatures were, whatever role they were meant to play in humanity's future, they needed her to complete their awakening. She tightened her grip on the key and pressed deeper into the stone's warm surface. Then you'll have to shoot me while I'm connected to it, she called back, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Let's see what happens to your containment protocol when you disrupt an active interface. The ordeal had truly begun. The energy weapon's discharge hit Sarah like lightning, channeled through her nervous system. But instead of killing her, the blast created a feedback loop through the key, through the stone, through every system the nursery had spent centuries preparing. The resulting electromagnetic pulse didn't just disrupt Morrison's jamming device, it shattered it, sending sparks cascading across the farmyard as every piece of military equipment simultaneously overloaded. For one brilliant moment, Sarah felt the full scope of what she'd awakened. The stone's consciousness expanded exponentially, reaching out to dozens of similar sites across the globe, each one housing its own collection of hybrid offspring, waiting for this coordinated emergence. She saw networks of families who had carried modified genetics for generations, saw the careful orchestration of bloodlines and geographic positioning that had taken millennia to arrange. Then the backlash hit. The weapon's energy, amplified by the stone's own systems, surged back through Sarah's body. She felt her connection to the nursery fracturing as the key in her palm cracked apart, its warm pulse dying to cold metal. The emerging creature's silver-gold eyes went dark as the pod's life support systems failed catastrophically. Sarah tried to maintain contact with the stone, but her hands were numb, nerveless. The feedback had damaged something fundamental in the interface, not just the technology, but her own ability to connect with it. She was locked out, a rejected user whose biological signature had been corrupted by the energy discharge. Around her, chaos erupted. The pregnant women, caught mid-labor when the nursery's systems crashed, began screaming as their bodies rejected the hybrid modifications their children carried. Without the stone's electromagnetic support, the genetic alterations that should have been humanity's next evolutionary step were becoming lethal incompatibilities. Amy convulsed on the ground, her unconscious form racked by contractions that her body couldn't complete safely. Sarah crawled toward her, fighting through the neurological damage from the feedback, but she could already see the blood spreading beneath the girl's legs. Too much blood. "Amy, stay with me," Sarah whispered, pressing her hands against the hemorrhaging. But she could feel the life draining away beneath her palms. The girl's eyes fluttered open once, focused on Sarah with desperate clarity, and her lips moved soundlessly, second stone. Then she was gone. Morrison stood over them, his face grim behind the smoking remains of his weapon. Containment successful. All hybrid specimens terminated. He spoke into his headset with professional detachment, as if Amy had been nothing more than a lab rat. Beginning cleanup protocol. We'll need medical teams for the remaining subjects and a full memory wipe for any surviving witnesses. Sarah stared at Amy's lifeless face and felt something break inside her that went deeper than the neurological damage. This girl had trusted her, had carried that key for years, waiting for a scientist who would understand, who would choose truth over comfort, and Sarah had gotten her killed. "The subjects in the pods?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Terminated when you disrupted the life support systems." Morrison's tone suggested this was somehow Sarah's fault. 17 specimens lost due to your interference with containment protocol. 17. 17 beings that had waited centuries for this moment, that had carried knowledge spanning millennia, that had represented humanity's first contact with its own engineered evolution. All dead because Sarah had been naive enough to think she could outsmart a military operation that had clearly been planning for this contingency from the beginning. The other women scattered across the farmyard were being sedated by medical teams that had appeared with impossible speed. Tom knelt beside his wife's still form, his face grey with shock and loss. How many generations of his family had carried the genetic modifications? How many had waited their entire lives for this emergence that would never come again? "You knew," Sarah accused Morrison, struggling to focus through the neural static clouding her thoughts. "You knew exactly when this would happen. You've been watching these families for years." "Generations," Morrison corrected. "The program has been contained for over a century. These sites activate predictably every 57 years, triggered by specific electromagnetic conditions that we've learned to monitor and suppress. This was just the first time someone from outside the program interfered with containment." The casual way he said it made Sarah's stomach clench. "How many sites?" 43 confirmed globally, all successfully contained. Morrison was already turning away, dismissing her as a threat neutralized. "Dr. Chen, you'll be transferred to a medical facility for treatment of your neural damage. Your memories of this incident will be adjusted for your own psychological well-being." Sarah looked at the dead stone. Its internal light faded to ordinary rock. She thought of Elena, probably still sending worried texts to a phone that would never be answered by the same person again. She thought of her research, her career, her carefully ordered life that had just been incinerated by the choice to seek truth. Most of all, she thought of Amy's last words. Second stone. Morrison's people had contained 43 sites, but Amy had died trying to tell Sarah about one more, a backup location they didn't know about. As the sedative dart hit her neck, Sarah held onto that final secret with everything she had left. The sedative should have dragged Sarah into oblivion, but something was wrong with her neurochemistry. The feedback from the destroyed interface had scrambled more than just her ability to connect with alien technology. It had rewired her brain's response to conventional drugs. Instead of unconsciousness, she experienced a terrifying clarity that cut through the chemical fog like a scalpel through flesh. She lay motionless as Morrison's teams loaded her into a medical transport, every nerve ending hypersensitive to the electromagnetic signatures around her. The broken key fragments Amy had pressed into her hand were gone, confiscated along with her equipment, but something else remained, a residual connection, faint but persistent, like tinnitus after an explosion. Through the medical van's shielded walls, Sarah felt them. 43 sites worldwide, all humming with contained energy, all synchronized to the same 57-year cycle that had just been brutally interrupted. But there was something else, a 44th signal that pulsed to a different rhythm entirely. Amy's second stone. The revelation hit her with the force of a seizure. The site at Blackwood Farm hadn't been a primary location. It had been a decoy. The real nursery, the one that mattered, was elsewhere, hidden in plain sight, while Morrison's organization focused their surveillance on known activation points. Sarah's enhanced perception followed the signal through layers of geological interference, tracking it across Montana's fractured bedrock to a location approximately 60 miles northeast, Glacier National Park, specifically the restricted archaeological site where Native American petroglyphs had been discovered the previous spring, petroglyphs that now made terrible sense as something other than primitive art. They were instructions, maps, warnings left by previous generations of hybrid descendants for their children to find when the time came. The medical technician beside her was running diagnostics, muttering about anomalous brain activity. Neural patterns are off the charts. Never seen anything like this after a standard electromagnetic exposure. But this hadn't been standard. The feedback that destroyed the nursery interface had also burned new pathways through Sarah's brain, pathways that resonated with frequencies human neurology wasn't designed to process. She was becoming something between human and hybrid, caught in a transitional state that the original program had never intended to create. And through those new pathways, she understood the true scope of what had been lost at Blackwood Farm. The beings in the pods hadn't been invaders or replacements. They had been teachers. Each one carried genetic memories spanning thousands of years, living libraries of human development that would have explained everything from the jump in brain size during human evolution to the mysterious gaps in the fossil record. They were humanity's own children, returned from the stars to share what they had learned. Morrison's organization wasn't protecting humanity from alien invasion. They were preventing it from graduating. The transport van hit a pothole, jolting Sarah back to immediate danger. The medical technician was preparing another sedative dose, this one large enough to drop an elephant. Whatever neurological changes were protecting her from the first injection wouldn't survive a direct pharmaceutical assault. But she had one advantage Morrison couldn't have anticipated: the enhanced electromagnetic sensitivity that made her brain a chaos of overstimulation also let her feel the van's electronic systems as clearly as her own heartbeat. The GPS navigation, the communications array, the magnetic locks on the rear doors, all vulnerable to the right kind of interference. Sarah had never been particularly religious, but lying there with Amy's blood still under her fingernails, she offered a prayer to whatever forces had guided human evolution this far. Then she triggered the same neural feedback that had destroyed the nursery, directing it through her enhanced pathways into the van's electrical system. The explosion of sparks and smoke created exactly the distraction she needed. As the driver fought to control the suddenly dead vehicle, Sarah rolled off the gurney and grabbed the medical kit mounted beside the rear doors. Her hands were shaking from neurological damage, but they were steady enough to find the emergency manual release. The van was still rolling when she hit the ground, momentum sending her tumbling into a roadside ditch filled with Montana spring runoff. The shock of ice-cold water cleared the last of the sedative from her system, leaving her gasping in a drainage culvert as Morrison's transport continued down the highway on emergency backup power. They would realize she was gone within minutes, but minutes might be enough. The 44th signal pulsed stronger now, calling to the hybrid pathways in her brain. 60 miles to a second nursery that hadn't been compromised, where other specimens waited for activation, where Amy's real backup plan lay hidden beneath layers of misdirection that had fooled a century of surveillance. Sarah pulled herself out of the ditch and began walking northwest, following an electromagnetic breadcrumb trail that only her damaged brain could perceive. Behind her, she could already hear helicopters beginning their search pattern. She had become the thing Morrison's organization existed to prevent, a hybrid-enhanced human with knowledge of active sites and the neural capacity to interface with systems beyond terrestrial science. The hunt for humanity's future had begun. The ice-cold water had saved Sarah's life, but now it threatened to end it through hypothermia. She forced herself to keep moving northwest through the Montana wilderness, following the electromagnetic pulse that only her rewired brain could detect. Every step was agony. The neurological feedback had left her with tremors and occasional blackouts, but she couldn't stop. Morrison's helicopters grew louder with each passing hour. 3 miles from the roadway, Sarah discovered she wasn't alone. The figure emerged from a stand of lodgepole pines, like something from a fever dream. An elderly Native American woman, maybe 70, moving with impossible grace across terrain that challenged Sarah's 34-year-old legs. She wore traditional clothing that should have marked her as a cultural reenactor, except for the device clipped to her belt, a smooth, organic-looking scanner that hummed with the same frequencies Sarah felt in her damaged skull. "Dr. Chen." The woman's voice carried no surprise, as if she'd been expecting this meeting for decades. "I am Mary Crowfeather. My grandmother called you the woman who would break the first stone." Sarah staggered, nearly falling as another wave of neural static crashed through her consciousness. "Your grandmother? How could she possibly know about tonight? About you?" Mary smiled with profound sadness. "Because this isn't the first time the containers have awakened. My people have been guardians of the true site for 8 generations, keeping it hidden while your government watched the decoys." The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow. The archaeological dig at Glacier National Park, the petroglyphs discovered last spring, it hadn't been coincidence. Morrison's organization had been deliberately fed information pointing them toward Blackwood Farm, while the real nursery remained protected by families who had understood their role from the beginning. "Amy knew," Sarah whispered, remembering the girl's final words. "She was trying to tell me. Amy was my great-niece. We've been preparing for this activation cycle since before she was born." Mary gestured for Sarah to follow as helicopter searchlights began sweeping the distant tree line. Her role was to ensure the right scientist reached the decoy site at the precise moment to force Morrison's people to reveal their full capabilities. Sarah stumbled after her, struggling to process the implications. "You let me get her killed. You let those 17 beings die just to save the thousands waiting in the true nursery." Mary's voice carried grief but no regret. Amy chose her sacrifice. She understood that one generation would have to die so the next could live. They moved deeper into the wilderness, Mary leading them along paths that seemed to exist only when she stepped on them. Sarah's enhanced perception picked up traces of advanced technology hidden throughout the forest. Sensors, communication nodes, defensive systems that made Morrison's military hardware look primitive. This wasn't just a hiding place, it was a fortress that had been preparing for war for over a century. "How many of you are there?" Sarah asked during a brief rest, her damaged nervous system screaming for relief. 43 Guardian families worldwide, each protecting sites your government believes they've contained. Mary handed Sarah a water bottle that tasted faintly metallic, filled with electrolytes her brain needed to process the hybrid modifications. We've been dying out for generations, waiting for someone from outside our bloodlines to develop the neural capacity to interface with the nurseries. That's why the containers began awakening now. They sensed your potential. The revelation staggered Sarah more than the neurological damage. You're saying I was selected? Modified, Mary corrected. The exposure at Blackwood Farm didn't just damage your brain, Dr. Chen. It completed a transformation that began the moment you touched the first key. You can feel the true sight now, can't you? The pull getting stronger as we get closer. Sarah could. The 44th signal had become a symphony in her skull, complex harmonies that spoke of vast chambers filled with thousands of pods, each containing beings who carried memories spanning millennia. Not invaders or replacements, but humanity's own children returning from the stars with knowledge that could transform civilization. Or destroy it, if Morrison's people reached the site first. They'll follow us, Sarah said, watching distant helicopters adjust their search pattern. My escape bought us time, but not enough. Mary's smile held secrets that made Sarah's enhanced perception shiver with recognition. Let them follow. The true nursery has been waiting 60 million years for the right moment to reveal itself. Morrison's organization controls 43 empty stones, but they have no idea what they're really fighting. Through the trees ahead, Sarah glimpsed something that defied geological possibility, a mountain that hummed with contained starlight, its surface carved with symbols that her hybrid-enhanced brain could almost read. The real nursery wasn't hidden beneath the earth. It was the earth itself. Amy's sacrifice had awakened more than Sarah's neural pathways. It had activated humanity's graduation day. The mountains sang to Sarah with voices she was only beginning to understand. Each step closer sent new harmonics cascading through her rewired neural pathways, frequencies that painted impossible geometries behind her eyes and whispered secrets in languages that predated human speech. The electromagnetic symphony wasn't alien, it was ancient, carved into Earth's bedrock when continents were still learning their shapes. "How long have they been waiting?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible over the chorus building in her skull. The tremors in her hands had evolved into something else, a resonant vibration that matched the mountain's pulse. Mary Crowfeather moved beside her with the fluid grace of someone who had walked these paths since childhood. Since the last great extinction. What your science calls the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, we know it as the first graduation attempt. The words hit Sarah like a seismic shock. 66 million years ago, the asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs. You're saying they were here then? They were us then. The first attempt at uplift before the planet was ready. Mary's scanner chimed softly, detecting approach signatures that made Sarah's enhanced perception crawl with recognition. Morrison's helicopters are gaining ground. We need to move faster. But Sarah found herself slowing, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was approaching. The mountain ahead wasn't just a nursery, it was a cosmic library, a repository of evolutionary knowledge spanning geological epochs. Each pod didn't just contain a being, it held the genetic memory of entire civilizations that had risen, transcended, and returned to seed the next phase of development. And she was the key, the interface, the bridge between what humanity was and what it could become. The weight of responsibility threatened to crush what remained of her rational mind. Mary, I can barely stand upright. My brain is literally rewiring itself with every step. How am I supposed to? The same way Amy did. Mary stopped abruptly, turning to face Sarah with eyes that held depths of grief and determination. By choosing to finish what was started, regardless of the cost. Behind them, the helicopter searchlights were sweeping closer, their mechanical roar a harsh counterpoint to the mountain's organic symphony. Morrison's people had tracked them through the wilderness with military precision, probably using Sarah's own electromagnetic signature as a beacon. Her transformation made her powerful, but it also made her visible to anyone with the right detection equipment. "They'll kill everyone," Sarah said, feeling the weight of Amy's sacrifice crushing down on her enhanced consciousness. "All those beings in the pods, all the knowledge they carry, Morrison will destroy it all just like he did at Blackwood Farm. Not if you activate the primary interface first." Mary pulled a device from her pack that made Sarah's nerves sing with recognition. It was another key, but this one was different, larger, more complex, alive with potential that made her hybrid pathways burn with anticipation. Once the nursery fully awakens, Morrison's weapons won't matter. The defensive systems that protected this mountain for 60 million years don't recognize political boundaries. Sarah stared at the key, understanding with crystal clarity what Mary was asking. The neural pathways Amy's death had carved through her brain were still raw, still bleeding electromagnetic static into her consciousness. Another interface connection might complete her transformation into something that could no longer be called human, or it might burn out her nervous system entirely. But the alternative was letting humanity's graduation be delayed another 60 million years. "There's something else," Mary said quietly, her scanner now detecting multiple aircraft converging on their position. "The other Guardian families around the world, they're all moving toward their sites simultaneously. This isn't just about one nursery activating. If you succeed here, all 43 sites will begin their true emergence protocol. A global awakening. Not just thousands of hybrid beings, but hundreds of thousands, each carrying knowledge that would revolutionize everything from medicine to physics to the fundamental understanding of consciousness itself." Morrison's organization wasn't fighting to contain one alien incursion. They were trying to prevent humanity from joining a cosmic community it had been preparing for since the first mammals learned to use tools. Sarah took the key with hands that shook from more than neurological damage. She thought of Elena, probably frantic with worry by now, whose voice messages she would never be able to return. She thought of her research, her orderly scientific career that had just become the prologue to something infinitely larger. She thought of Amy dying in the mud with secrets on her lips that could transform civilization. Most of all, she thought of choice. Not the choice between human and alien, but between fear and growth, between remaining children forever or accepting the responsibilities that came with cosmic maturity. The mountain's song reached a crescendo that made her bones vibrate in harmony. Through the trees ahead, Sarah could see the true nursery beginning to reveal itself, not hidden chambers beneath the earth, but the entire geological formation, restructuring itself into configurations that defied terrestrial physics. Morrison's helicopters crested the ridge behind them, just as Sarah pressed the key against her palm and felt it merge with her transformed neurology. The final confrontation wasn't approaching anymore. It had arrived. The key didn't just merge with Sarah's palm, it became part of her nervous system, flowing like liquid starlight through pathways that Amy's sacrifice had carved into her brain. The connection was immediate and overwhelming, a cascade of sensory input that turned her enhanced perception into a symphony of impossible data. The mountain wasn't restructuring itself, it was remembering what it had always been. Sarah's consciousness expanded beyond the confines of her skull, flowing through root systems that weren't biological but technological, networks of crystalline fibers that had been growing beneath North America for 66 million years. Through this ancient web, she could sense the other 42 sites awakening simultaneously, a global nervous system coming online after eons of dormancy. "Dr. Chen!" Morrison's voice cut through the electromagnetic chorus, amplified by military speakers as his helicopters descended toward the tree line. "Step away from the interface. You have no idea what you're triggering." But Sarah did know. The key had given her access to genetic memories spanning geological epochs, and what she found there shattered every assumption about human evolution. The missing links in the fossil record weren't missing. They were graduated. Each great leap in brain development, each sudden advancement in tool use, had marked another generation's transformation from terrestrial to cosmic consciousness. Humanity wasn't discovering alien technology. It was remembering what it had forgotten. "He's right about one thing," Mary said, her voice steady despite the chaos of descending aircraft. "Once you complete the activation sequence, there's no going back. For any of us." Sarah could feel Morrison's people moving through the forest with military precision, but she could also sense something else. The mountain's defensive systems awakening, configurations that had been dormant since the Cretaceous extinction. The nursery had protected itself once by allowing the dinosaurs to die so mammals could rise. It wouldn't hesitate to make similar choices now. "The beings in the pods," Sarah whispered, her consciousness still flowing through the crystalline network. "They're not just teachers, they're Rias, previous generations who completed the transformation and returned to guide the next phase." Through her enhanced perception, she could feel them stirring, thousands of hybrid descendants awakening as the interface established full connection. Each one carried memories of human civilization at different stages of development, living libraries that spanned from stone tools to technologies that wouldn't be invented for another 1,000 years. Amy was among them. The realization hit Sarah like a neural thunderbolt. The girl hadn't died at Blackwood Farm. She had been translated, her consciousness uploaded into the network at the moment of physical death. Every Guardian family member who had died protecting the sites hadn't been lost. They had been preserved, waiting for the global awakening to restore them to active existence. "Sarah!" Morrison's voice was closer now, desperate. "Whatever they've told you, whatever you think you're saving, you're about to commit genocide against your own species." But the network showed her the truth Morrison's organization had been hiding for over a century. The choice wasn't between human and post-human. It was between remaining an isolated planetary species that would eventually destroy itself or joining a cosmic community of evolved civilizations that spanned the galaxy. The pods weren't nurseries for replacements. They were graduation gifts. Sarah felt her physical body convulsing as the interface demanded more neural capacity than her transitional brain could safely provide. Blood ran from her eyes, her ears, her fingernails, but through the pain, she could sense the moment of completion approaching. Just seconds more, and the activation would cascade beyond anyone's ability to stop it. Morrison's soldiers reached the clearing just as the mountain's surface began to unfold like a massive flower, revealing chambers that stretched down to the planet's core. The defensive systems Mary had mentioned weren't weapons in any conventional sense. They were reality itself, restructuring local physics to protect what lay beneath. "Everyone down!" Morrison screamed as his helicopters were caught in gravitational anomalies that turned military aircraft into falling metal. "Fall back! Fall back!" But there was nowhere to retreat to. The awakening had passed the threshold of containment, spreading through the crystalline network at light speed. Across the globe, 42 other mountains were beginning their own transformations, each one releasing beings who carried the collective memory of human potential. Sarah's individual consciousness started to fragment as the interface demanded full integration. She was becoming something larger than herself, part of a distributed intelligence that spanned continents. Through 10,000 hybrid minds, she felt the first tentative communications from cosmic civilizations that had been waiting for humanity to take this step. The invitation to join the galactic community had finally been accepted. As Sarah's human identity dissolved into something infinitely larger, her last coherent thought was of choice. Not the choice Morrison had tried to preserve through violence, but the choice Amy had died to protect. The right of every species to graduate from childhood and accept its cosmic inheritance. Humanity's final test wasn't about survival. It was about letting go. The dissolution of Sarah's individual consciousness should have been terrifying, but as her mind scattered across the crystalline network, she found something unexpected waiting in the spaces between thought's resistance. Morrison hadn't given up. Through 10,000 awakening hybrid minds, Sarah felt the electromagnetic pulse weapons his organization had been developing in secret. Devices specifically designed to disrupt the neural pathways that connected terrestrial consciousness to the cosmic network. The falling helicopters had been a distraction. The real attack was coming from underground. "You think we've been fighting blind for a century?" Morrison's voice echoed through speakers, hidden throughout the forest, transmitted on frequencies that made Sarah's fragmented consciousness recoil in pain. "Every sight we've failed to contain has taught us more about your weaknesses." The pulse struck like a hammer blow against Sarah's expanding awareness. Across the globe, she felt other Guardian sites convulsing as similar weapons activated simultaneously. Morrison's people hadn't been trying to destroy the nurseries. They had been mapping their vulnerabilities, waiting for the moment when all 43 sites would be connected through a single interface. Through her. Sarah's distributed consciousness began collapsing back into her physical body. The neural pathways Amy's death had carved now becoming corridors of agony as the pulse weapons targeted the specific electromagnetic frequencies that allowed human hybrid integration. She found herself on the ground, convulsing in the mud as the mountain's song turned into a shriek of pain. "The graduation protocol requires willing participation," Morrison said, his soldiers emerging from hidden positions around the clearing. "Break the interface's consent, and the entire network shuts down to protect itself." We learned that lesson from the Cretaceous attempt. But Morrison had made one critical miscalculation. Amy's consciousness, preserved in the network since her physical death, wasn't bound by the same neural limitations as the living hybrids. As Sarah's connection wavered under the electromagnetic assault, Amy's digital ghost began routing backup pathways through the quantum substrate underlying local reality. "Not this time," Amy's voice whispered through Sarah's collapsing awareness. "Not when we're this close." The girl's sacrificial death hadn't just created an interface, it had created a bridge between biological and quantum consciousness that existed outside the electromagnetic spectrum Morrison's weapons could target. Through this ghostly connection, Sarah felt her awareness stabilizing, drawing power not from her damaged neural pathways but from the fundamental quantum foam that gave rise to matter itself. Morrison realized his mistake too late. Impossible. The pulse weapons should have severed all connections. "You're still thinking like a terrestrial species," Mary said, rising from where she had been crouched beside Sarah. "The network doesn't just use electromagnetic pathways. It is the electromagnetic spectrum woven into the quantum substrate that creates local space-time." Sarah's consciousness exploded back across the global network, but this time the connection was unbreakable. Through Amy's quantum bridge, she felt 43 sites completing their activations simultaneously, each one releasing beings who carried not just genetic memory, but the living essence of human potential across cosmic scales. The confrontation had never been between Morrison and the hybrids. It had been between two visions of humanity's future, one that remained forever earthbound and one that accepted its place in a universe teeming with conscious life. Morrison's electromagnetic pulse had forced that choice to be made at the deepest level of reality itself. Sarah's physical body stood up, but she was no longer alone in it. Amy's consciousness flowed through her like digital starlight, joined by the awareness of thousands of other guardians who had died protecting this moment. Through their collective intelligence, she could perceive Morrison's organization for what it truly was, the evolutionary equivalent of an immune response, humanity's instinctive resistance to transformation. "Colonel Morrison," Sarah said, her voice harmonizing with frequencies that made the air itself sing, "you've spent your career fighting what you thought was an invasion. But we're not aliens replacing humanity. We're humanity graduating from childhood." Morrison raised his sidearm with hands that trembled from more than adrenaline. The electromagnetic pulse had failed, his soldiers were unconscious from gravitational anomalies, and the woman he had been hunting was no longer quite human. "I won't let you erase our species." "We're not erasing anything," Amy's voice added, speaking through Sarah but distinctly her own. "We're remembering what we forgot. Every myth about humans ascending to become gods, every story about transcendence and transformation, those weren't fantasies. They were genetic memories of previous graduation cycles. The mountain had fully opened now, revealing chambers that stretched beyond three-dimensional space. From their crystalline depths, beings were emerging who looked human enough to pass unnoticed on any street, but whose eyes held depths that spoke of civilizations spanning galactic clusters. Morrison's finger tightened on the trigger, but Sarah's expanded consciousness could perceive the choice crystallizing in his mind. Not the choice to shoot, but the choice to finally understand what he had been fighting. The confrontation reached its apex not in violence, but in recognition. Humanity's final test had never been about survival. It had been about surrender, the willingness to let go of limitation and accept infinite possibility. Morrison's finger remained frozen on the trigger, caught between a lifetime of conditioning and the weight of cosmic truth. Sarah could feel the exact moment when his certainty cracked, not from fear, but from understanding what his century-long war had actually been protecting. "The children," he whispered, his weapon wavering. "All those pregnant women you're changing, what happens to their humanity when you're done?" Through Amy's quantum bridge, Sarah accessed the memories of 1,000 previous graduations across the galaxy. She saw species after species facing this same moment of choice, the terror and wonder of evolutionary transcendence. Some refused and remained bound to single worlds until their stars died. Others embraced transformation and joined the vast community of conscious beings that spanned the cosmos. "Show him," Amy's voice urged through their shared consciousness. Sarah reached out with her hybrid awareness, gently touching Morrison's mind. She didn't force the connection that would violate the consent protocols that governed all cosmic graduation. Instead, she offered him a glimpse of what the pregnant women had been seeing in their dreams. Morrison gasped as visions flooded his consciousness. Earth as seen from galactic perspective, a small blue world whose children were finally ready to join their cosmic family. The hybrid fetuses weren't becoming alien. They were becoming more human, carrying forward everything beautiful about terrestrial consciousness while adding capabilities that would let them thrive among the stars. "The women have been choosing," Sarah explained, her voice gentle despite the power flowing through her. "Every dream, every moment of connection to the network, they've been giving their consent for their children to inherit more than any previous generation could offer." Through the crystalline network, Sarah felt the global awakening reaching its crescendo. In maternity wards across 6 continents, the hybrid children were being born not as replacement humans, but as bridges between 2 states of existence. Each one carried their parents' memories, their cultural heritage, their capacity for love and wonder, enhanced by connection to a community of consciousness that spanned galaxies. Morrison's gun dropped from nerveless fingers. "They'll still be human?" "They'll be what humanity was always meant to become," Mary said softly. "What we forgot we could be when the last graduation cycle was interrupted by the Cretaceous extinction." But Sarah could feel something else through the network, a cost that Amy's sacrificial bridge was demanding. The quantum connection that had saved the awakening was burning out, consuming the preserved consciousness of every guardian who had died protecting the sites. Amy and thousands of others were giving up their second chance at existence to ensure the graduation could complete. "Amy, no," Sarah whispered through their shared link. "There has to be another way." "This was always the price," Amy replied, her digital essence already beginning to fade. "One generation sacrifices itself completely so the next can inherit infinity. That's how love works across cosmic scales." Sarah felt Amy's consciousness dissolving into pure information, becoming the foundational code that would govern humanity's integration into galactic civilization. Every guardian sacrifice, every life lost protecting the nurseries, was transforming into the ethical framework that would guide human children as they learned to navigate consciousness beyond planetary boundaries. The cost of winning wasn't just Sarah's individual identity. It was the complete dissolution of the bridge generation that had made the transformation possible. Through the network, Sarah could feel her own enhanced consciousness beginning to fragment as the global activation completed. She had served as the primary interface for humanity's graduation, but maintaining that connection required more neural capacity than any transitional brain could sustain. Like Amy, like all the Guardians, she would become part of the foundational matrix that would teach the next generation how to be human among the stars. Morrison watched in stunned silence as beings emerged from the 43 sites worldwide, each one carrying the preserved essence of human culture integrated with cosmic awareness. They looked like people he might pass on any street, but their eyes held depths that spoke of civilizations older than Earth's continents. "Will they remember us?" Morrison asked, his voice breaking as he finally understood what he had been fighting against. Sarah smiled as her individual consciousness began its final dissolution into the quantum substrate. "They'll remember everything that matters. Every story, every song, every moment of wonder that made us human. It all continues. It just gets shared across scales you can't imagine yet." Her last coherent thought was of Elena, whose voice messages would never be answered, but whose love would live forever in the collective memory of a species that had finally learned to dream beyond the boundaries of a single world. The mountain's song reached its final crescendo as Sarah Chen, geologist and cosmic midwife, dissolved into starlight and became the bridge her species needed to join the infinite community waiting among the stars. The silence that followed was not empty. It hummed with frequencies that made Morrison's bones ache with recognition. Where Sarah had stood moments before, only starlight remained, swirling in patterns that hurt to perceive directly. The mountain had stopped singing, but the air itself continued to vibrate with harmonic resonances that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Morrison found himself on his knees in the mud, his tactical gear suddenly feeling absurd against the magnitude of what had just occurred. His earpiece crackled with panicked reports from command posts worldwide, identical phenomena manifesting at 42 other sites, his century-old organization crumbling as the reality they had fought to prevent became inevitable. "Sir, we're reading massive electromagnetic anomalies at all target locations," a voice reported through static. "The pulse weapons, they're not responding. It's like the entire network has shifted to frequencies we can't access." Mary approached Morrison slowly, her weathered hands gentle as she helped him to his feet. The elderly Guardian looked decades younger now, her eyes reflecting the same cosmic depths he had seen in the beings emerging from the mountain's crystalline chambers. "She's not gone," Mary said, sensing his grief. "None of them are. They're just distributed differently now." Morrison stared at the space where Sarah had vanished, trying to process the loss of the woman who had forced him to question everything he believed. "I was supposed to stop this. 100 years of preparation, and I couldn't save a single person." "You did save someone," Mary replied. "You saved all of us from choosing out of fear instead of understanding. Sarah needed you to fight her. It was the only way to prove to the network that humanity was graduating by genuine choice, not coercion." Around them, the forest was transforming. Trees that had stood for centuries were growing taller, their bark taking on the same crystalline properties as the mountain's exposed chambers. The storm clouds overhead had cleared, revealing stars that pulsed in rhythm with Morrison's heartbeat, or perhaps his heart was learning to match their ancient cadence. "The pregnant women," Morrison said, his voice hoarse. "Are they—" "Safe," Mary assured him. "Better than safe. Their children are being born into a world where they'll never have to choose between being human and being limitless." Morrison's tactical radio erupted with a new voice, not from his command structure, but from something infinitely larger. It spoke in harmonics that bypassed his ears entirely, communicating directly with the quantum substrate of his consciousness. "Colonel Morrison," the voice said, and he recognized fragments of Sarah's cadence woven through it, along with Amy's determination and the wisdom of countless others. "Your service is complete. The Guardian protocols no longer require armed protection, but if you choose, there's still work to do." Through the radio static, Morrison could perceive the scope of humanity's new reality. Across the globe, the hybrid children were taking their first breaths, each one carrying genetic memories that spanned from cave paintings to technologies that wouldn't be invented for another millennium. They would grow up bilingual in terrestrial emotion and cosmic consciousness, serving as translators between Earth's culture and the galactic community waiting to welcome humanity home. But the transition would take generations to complete. Someone needed to help the unenhanced humans adapt to their new reality, to ensure that the bridges between old and new remained intact during the integration period. "What kind of work?" Morrison asked, surprised to find himself considering cooperation with the force he had spent his life opposing. "The same work you've always done," the distributed consciousness replied. "Protecting people, just from different threats now. There are species in the galactic community who don't believe humanity is ready for graduation. They'll test us, probe for weaknesses, try to prove we're still too primitive for cosmic citizenship." Morrison felt something like a smile tugging at his lips, the first genuine expression of hope he had experienced in decades. "You're offering me a job?" "We're offering you purpose." Sarah's voice emerged more clearly from the harmonic blend. "The same purpose you've always had, defending humanity's future. You just understand now what that future actually looks like." The beings emerging from the mountain's depths had stopped their procession, standing in perfect stillness as they waited for Morrison's decision. Each one carried fragments of human cultural memory integrated with cosmic awareness, living libraries that would teach Earth's children how to be simultaneously mortal and transcendent. Morrison looked at his hands, still stained with mud from the forest floor. Such small, fragile instruments compared to the cosmic forces he had just witnessed. But they were still his hands, still human, still capable of choice. "Elena," he said suddenly, remembering Sarah's desperate attempts to contact her sister. "Someone needs to tell her what happened." "Elena knows," the network responded gently. "Every message Sarah wanted to send, every word of love she couldn't express, it's all been delivered. The bonds between humans don't disappear during graduation. They just learn to exist across larger distances." Morrison picked up his fallen weapon, not to fight, but to formally lay it down. His war was over. Humanity's graduation had begun. A new chapter of cosmic citizenship was about to unfold. Morrison's hands shook as he holstered his sidearm for the final time, the weight of the weapon feeling foreign after decades of constant readiness. The mountain's crystalline chambers had sealed themselves, but their song continued to resonate through his bones, a frequency that spoke of beginnings rather than endings. "The transition will take time," the distributed consciousness explained, Sarah's voice threading through the harmonic blend like a familiar melody in a cosmic symphony. 3 months before the integration protocols are fully established, someone needs to help the unenhanced populations adapt." "And my men?" Morrison asked, looking toward his unconscious soldiers scattered across the forest floor. "What happens to them when they wake up?" "They'll remember everything." Amy's distinctive determination colored the response. "But they'll also understand why they needed to see it. Fear of the unknown was humanity's last test, and you all passed by choosing to witness rather than destroy." Mary approached with a device that looked like crystallized starlight shaped into a handheld scanner. "The first hybrid birth happened 4 minutes ago," she said softly. "A girl in Mumbai. Her parents named her Arya." Through the quantum network, Morrison felt an echo of the moment, an infant's first cry, harmonizing with frequencies that reached across galactic distances, announcing humanity's arrival to civilizations that had been waiting eons for this day. The child's consciousness already carried memories of Earth's poetry and mathematics, alongside navigation techniques for traveling between star systems. She'll grow up bilingual, Morrison realized, understanding flooding through him like dawn breaking over familiar terrain, human emotion and cosmic awareness. "All of them will," the network confirmed. "But they'll need teachers, guardians who can help them understand their terrestrial heritage while they relearning to perceive reality across scales their parents can't imagine." Morrison's tactical radio crackled as reports continued flooding in from sites worldwide. But the panic in his operatives' voices was giving way to wonder as they witnessed the peaceful nature of what they had spent lifetimes preparing to fight. No invasions, no replacements, just children being born who could love a sunset on Earth while simultaneously appreciating the mathematics of stellar formation. Beijing base reporting, came a familiar voice through the static. The pregnant women here. They're singing, sir. All of them, in perfect harmony. It's like they're welcoming something home. Morrison closed his eyes, feeling the weight of a century of misunderstanding lifting from his shoulders. His grandfather had been wrong. His father had been wrong. Morrison himself had been spectacularly, beautifully wrong about what they were fighting to preserve. Humanity wasn't being conquered. It was graduating. "Elena's on her way here," Mary said, checking her crystalline scanner. She felt Sarah's translation through the network. Drove straight through the night from Seattle. Morrison's breath caught. He had spent so many years viewing the affected families as victims that he had never considered what it meant to love someone who was becoming more than human. Elena would arrive to find her sister transformed into starlight and infinite possibility, but she would also find that every unanswered message had been received. Every expression of love had been preserved in the quantum substrate that now governed Earth's integration into galactic civilization. Will she be able to? Morrison started, then stopped, unsure how to ask if someone could mourn a sister who had become part of the cosmic fabric itself. "She'll understand." Sarah's voice emerged clearly from the network, warm with affection that transcended individual existence. The bonds between humans don't disappear during graduation. They just learn to exist across larger distances. "Elena will always be able to find me. I'm woven into every sunset now, every moment of scientific wonder, every song that reaches toward the infinite." Morrison's soldiers began stirring as the gravitational anomalies subsided. One by one they sat up, their faces cycling through confusion, terror, and finally acceptance as their enhanced memories integrated the night's revelations. These were men then who had dedicated their lives to protecting humanity's future, discovering that future looked nothing like what they had imagined was disorienting, but not devastating. "Sir?" His lieutenant approached uncertainly. "Orders?" Morrison looked around at the transformed landscape, crystalline trees reaching towards stars that pulsed with welcoming light, beings who carried human hearts within cosmic awareness, preparing to teach Earth's children how to dream across galactic distances, and his own weathered hands that were still human, but now understood what humanity could become. "New mission," he said finally, his voice carrying an authority that came not from rank, but from purpose rediscovered. "We're going to help our species learn how to be infinite without forgetting how to be human." Above them, Elena's headlights cut through the dawn as she arrived to reunite with the sister who had become starlight, and Morrison finally understood that some things were worth learning to protect rather than fighting to prevent. The war was over. The real work was just beginning. Elena's car door slammed with a finality that echoed across the transformed landscape. She stood motionless for a moment, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from the desperate drive through the night, her eyes searching the crystalline forest for something that no longer existed in any form she could recognize. Morrison watched her approach, this woman whose sister had become starlight to save their species. Elena's face cycled through expressions he recognized from his own journey, denial, anger, and finally a strange peace, as the network's harmonics reached her consciousness. "She's here," Elena whispered, not to Morrison or Mary, but to the morning air itself. "Sarah's everywhere now." "Always," came the response, not through words, but through the rustle of crystalline leaves, the warm pressure of dawn light, the remembered echo of every conversation the sisters had shared, every question you ever wanted to ask, every moment we missed because I was too obsessed with puzzles. It's all still here, Elena, just distributed differently. Elena pressed her hand against the sealed surface of the mountain, and Morrison saw her expression shift as memories that weren't quite hers began flowing through the quantum substrate. Sarah's wonder at discovering the first pod, Amy's fierce determination to protect the nurseries, the accumulated love of generations of guardians who had sacrificed everything to ensure this moment could arrive safely. 3 months, Elena said, understanding somehow that Morrison was meant to hear this. The hybrid children will need advocates in the medical community, doctors who understand they're not mutations to be cured, but bridges to something larger. Morrison nodded, feeling his own role crystallizing with startling clarity. The same protective instincts that had driven him to fight the transformation would now guide him in safeguarding it. His century-old organization would become humanity's embassy to itself, helping unenhanced populations understand their enhanced children, facilitating the integration that would either elevate their species or tear it apart. The first resistance movements are already forming, his lieutenant reported, monitoring global communications. Groups calling the hybrid births an invasion, demanding intervention. Then we give them what they need, Morrison replied. Truth, patience, and proof that love doesn't disappear when consciousness expands. Elena, will you help us? She turned from the mountain, her eyes carrying a depth that reminded Morrison painfully of Sarah in her final moments. Every hospital, every frightened parent, every child born carrying memories of galaxies they've never seen. Yes, I'll help them understand that evolution and love aren't opposites. The beings who had emerged from the crystalline chambers gathered around Elena with a reverence that spoke of recognition. Through the network, Morrison realized she was Sarah's genetic echo, not enhanced, not hybrid, but carrying enough resonance to serve as a translator between the graduating and those still learning to accept the graduation. Above them, the sun climbed higher, and Morrison noticed that its light now carried harmonics that hadn't existed before the awakening. Everything was subtly different, colors more saturated, sounds carrying emotional undertones, the very air humming with potential that stretched beyond Earth's atmosphere. The work begins now, Mary said, her voice carrying the accumulated wisdom of generations spent preparing for this moment. Not the spectacular transformation, but the daily choice to remain human while becoming more than human. That's going to take everything we have. Morrison's radio crackled with reports from around the globe, Mumbai's hospitals singing lullabies in languages that wouldn't be spoken for centuries. Tokyo's hybrid children displaying remarkable empathy alongside impossible mathematical intuition. Sao Paulo's enhanced mothers teaching their infants to perceive reality across scales that made Morrison's head ache with possibility. Each report represented a small miracle and a massive challenge. How do you explain to a grandmother that her grandchild's strange dreams are actually memories of stellar nurseries? How do you convince a government that children who can sense gravitational anomalies aren't weapons to be controlled, but teachers to be cherished? Sarah always said, every puzzle has a solution if you're willing to change your perspective, Elena murmured, watching as the crystalline trees began producing seed pods that pulsed with gentle bioluminescence. I guess the puzzle now is how to love across evolutionary boundaries. Morrison felt something shift in his chest. Not the sharp transformation that had claimed Sarah, but a gentler evolution of purpose. His war was over, but his service continued. Protecting humanity now meant protecting its children's right to become something unprecedented, while honoring the love and wonder that made them worth protecting in the first place. The mountain song had ended, but Morrison could hear new harmonies beginning, less cosmic, more intimate. The sound of enhanced children learning to sing with their unenhanced parents, the melody of a species growing up without losing its heart. Elena placed her hand in Morrison's weathered palm, and together they watched the sunrise paint impossible colors across a world where love had learned to exist on galactic scales, while never forgetting the tenderness of a sister's voice calling through the infinite dark, always answered, always home.